Hello and welcome to another episode of StratoCast, the Battletech UK Southeast podcast, where we look at ways to help you support your playing Battletech. And today we are looking at Chaos Campaign. Now, a couple of people have asked me about this, and so I decided to do a podcast on it. Chaos Campaign, well, what is it? Well, Chaos Campaign is a way of playing Battletech that involves having a series of scenarios, which we call tracks. They're sometimes called touch points, and to manage repairs between those and play it as a series of, campaign, a series of different missions. So it's a good place to start if you've been playing Battletech with the introduction mechs, or even been playing with other mechs for a while, and you want to get into a very simple campaign. Chaos Campaign is a great way to do it. It's very easy to do, very versatile. There's a minimum of administration, a minimum of maths, and literally I would say after a gaming session, less than 15 minutes is needed to do the administration at the end of this. There's no dice rolls. It's not like the full campaign operations, campaign rules. It's very, very quick and easy, and very good if you want to get together and play a series of games. So we're going to talk about how to go about playing a Chaos Campaign, how to set up, and how to manage it. There are lots of different ways to do this. There's no set rules in the actual document, which I've got up here, for actually generations. Now, the document of generating companies or generating forces, and we'll talk about that in a minute. The document I've got up here is the Battletech Chaos Campaign Succession Wars book, which is free, which is why I'm showing it on the screen, because I'm not going to breach any copyright, I guess, because it's free. You can download it from DriveThruRPG or from the Catalyst store. It costs $0, so I'm quite happy to show it on the screen here. There are fuller Chaos Campaign rules in the campaign operations. You can also find it in the Word of Blake document, which Total Chaos, which probably is quite hard to find at the moment unless you get it as a PDF. And then there are several references and lots of different supplements throughout the Battletech product line. But this version here is a very slimline version, a very easy to play version. It doesn't have all of the features, and it's really aimed at people playing in the Succession Wars, so playing with introductory technology, and it limits the complexities. So the ideal Chaos Campaign is to basically have a series of 4 or more scenarios that are basically happening one after the other, and you can play either as player versus player, which is okay. I would recommend you do that. Actually have 2 players or 2 teams of players playing against each other, or you can have a more kind of narrative RPG style, which is a player versus GM, where the GM isn't actively, I would guess, trying to beat the opponent. As you know from GMs from role-playing games, the GM is actively trying to tell the storyline, and the players are either one or many are playing the kind of heroes, and the GM wants to progress that with challenge, but progress that forward in an interesting way. So there are 2 different ways, I would say, the RPG kind of player versus GM mode, or the kind of more wargamey player versus player mode. Okay, and either one is absolutely fine. In player versus player, both players will keep track of their forces, and player versus GM, then really only the players need to keep track of the forces. The GM doesn't do all of the admin, and just puts up a suitable force for every scenario. So the real beginning is, how do you go about making a force? And this is the bit where Chaos Campaigns doesn't tell you, because it's really up to you how you do it. There's so many different ways. I'm going to give you 4 options. I know 4 sounds a lot, but we're going to start really simple for those people who don't want to do any maths, and go up to more complicated. And these are just suggestions. They're not definite that you have to do this. They are just suggestions. So number 1 is having a tonnage limit and saying, okay, we're going to create a company of battle mechs. That's 12 battle mechs only, nothing else, and we're going to set a tonnage limit. And my suggestion would be 225 tons per lance, so that's 675 tons for the entire force. And so you just go and pick some mechs, and by the way, it works out really well because the Battletech A Game of Armored Combat box set has 2 lances of 225 tons. So you just need 4 more mechs and you've got yourself a company, and it makes a nice easy round number, so no more than 675 tons. And then once you've done that, you can say, right, in each lance I'm going to elect a lance leader, and the lance leaders are going to be veterans who are going to have a skill of piloting skill 4 and gunnery skill 3. And then your commanding officer, who's going to be leading your command lance, is going to be an elite, and he's going to have piloting skill 3 and gunnery skill 2. And this system, you don't have to worry about battle value at all. You just basically just say, right, that's the way we're setting it up. You don't even have to think about all these battle value calculations. And you get a nice company that's very quick and easy to do. So that's method 1. Method 2 is to go the battle value way. Now, with Chaos Campaign, for in the late succession era, so basically 3025, I would recommend using 15,000 battle value. And again, having 12 mechs and 15,000 battle value actually is just about right for giving you a range of skills. So let's just think the Battletech A Game of Armored Combat box set, if you make the lances, you can make them about 5,000 BV per lance if you give one of the pilots a slightly better pilot skill and make them the commanding officer of that lance. So it's very, again, easy to do. Of course, in this case, you've just got to look through your units and pick the units you want to get up to 15,000 BV, but you can also say that in each lance, one character can be up to veteran, and except one character in the command lance can be up to elite. So again, that's if you look in the back of Total War, it tells you that elite is up to a 2-3 as the lowest skill possible. I say lowest because the numbers go down rather than up. And the veteran, the lowest is 3-4, and then all of the other forces should be regular. You might decide to include a couple of cadets and have a couple of green, but I wouldn't recommend it because it can slow the game down quite a lot because they can't hit the side of a barn. But if you want to, for a narrative purpose, to put some green troops in, you can. So method 2, 15,000 BV, 12 mechs in 3 lances, and then have 1 commander who's elite and 2 lieutenants, a lieutenant junior grade, lieutenant senior grade, who are veterans. So that's method 2. Method 3 is quite radical and requires a little bit of guts to do. But method 3 is randomness. Randomness is great. So in method 3, you roll everything. You have 12 mechs and you basically roll the mechs on the random assignment tables, which you can find in various products. But you have to define what mechs there are going to be in terms of weight class. You can have the command lance, which should be recommended to be an assault, a heavy, and a medium. Then the kind of medium lance, which would be a heavy, a medium, and a light. And then the light recon lance, which would be a medium and 3 lights. And once you've defined what mechs are going to be there, you go to the random assignment table, you choose what affiliation you're playing, okay, because there are different random assignment tables and mercenaries, etc. And you roll some dice and you hope you get lucky because you could get all sorts of different things. And then once you've done that, you then roll randomly on the skills. So you roll randomly for the regular skills, you roll randomly for the veteran, who are going to be leading the medium lance and the light lance, and you roll randomly for the elite, who is going to be in the command lance. And that all the rolls for random roll tables in the back of Total Warfare in the campaign section. So you can basically just roll up completely randomly. Method 4, I won't mention much, but method 4 is basically going completely down the rabbit hole, and that's to bring out your copy of A Time of War. And I've just kind of started doing this, and then using A Time of War to generate your characters, and then those characters will have mechs depending on what traits they take. I won't explain that any more than that. If you're familiar with A Time of War, that's something you could try. If you're not familiar with A Time of War, I wouldn't recommend step 4 straight away. Really, if you don't want a lot of maths, the first method, doing by tonnage, is really easy, but it won't work in other areas where there's mixed technologies. Method 2 is probably the best just for a balanced game. And method 3 is crazy because you could end up with your and your opponent force being slightly mismatched, but some people like a little bit of randomness, and some people really enjoy the random element of rolling up on the random assignment tables. So that's our 4 methods for creating a company. So you created a company. Now I will say at this stage, if you are completely crazy, which I am, and you want to play battalion level, it is possible. You can actually have 36 mechs in your company, in your battalion. Okay, so battalion is 3 companies, 3 to 4, and you can have 36 mechs in your roster and really go for it. And don't worry, because usually you won't have 100% of the force, but it's an option. Also, haven't mentioned so far, this system is fully compatible with Alpha Strike. So there's no reason you couldn't do that with Alpha Strike. And of course, in an Alpha Strike game, it's much easier to have a larger amount of forces and deal with that. So how do we actually go about playing? Okay, so the first thing to do is decide what your kind of era is going to be. And in this case, it's quite easy. It's the Succession Wars. Who are going to be your forces? So what area is it going to be in? Is it going to be on the Lyra and Draconis Combine? Is it going to be on the is it just going to be Mercenary on Mercenary? Is it going to be Federated Suns versus Draconis Combine? It seems to be everyone versus Draconis Combine, or Federated Suns versus Capellan Confederation. Just choose the 2 kind of forces that are going to be at work and assign one of them generally as the attacking force and one as the defending force. You'll need some maps, of course, but we're going to be rolling randomly. Okay, and again, you've got the idea of player versus player or GM, which it mentions here. Okay, I'm not going to go for it very slowly in the book, because you can get your own copy and read through it. Each force starts with something called war chest points, which is 1,000 war chest points. Now, war chest points are an abstraction. They're an abstraction of lots of things. They're an abstraction of experience, an abstraction of reputation, an abstraction of resources, of victory, of status. They're basically everything rolled into one. Your war chest points at that point tells you how successful your group is being. And if you ever reach 0, you effectively go bankrupt and you go into debt. And you can either have, and we'll come back to victory conditions later, but you can either say that you play the game until you reach 0 war chest points and the force is forced to disband, or you can play to the end of the scenario and allow people to get to negative war chest points, which has implications on repairs. So you select your forces, okay, and again, you can choose your forces and generations. There is a force generation here where it says 12 mechs of their choice, starting with 3 to 4. Okay, and it says a loose guideline recommends that players have 1 lance of light, 1 lance of medium, 1 lance of heavy mechs. And I've kind of like described a way of doing that at the introduction to that. So again, you can basically just triple that and go up to battalion, but that requires a lot of time. And you've got a nice starting company there, which is using 2 boxes of Battletech: A Game of Armor Combat and a or other products, and the beginner's box, because you've got the Griffin in there. So each mission is called a track, or you'll see it in some products called a touch point. The kind of difference between tracks and touch points, they're both types of scenario, is a track is a generic thing, whereas a touch point tends to be specific to a plot. And there's no real kind of difference between them, but usually if you're designing a quite intricate campaign, you'd have a series of random tracks where basically they randomly select them, and then you'd have set touch points which the players have to go through. But in this case, there's just a series of simple tracks. Each track has a situation which describes what's happening in that situation, what's going on, the introduction to it, game setup, how many maps you're going to be in, how the defender and the attacker deploy, and then it has a cost. So the war chest cost is a bit of an odd one. War chest cost is the amount of war chest points you need to spend. Literally, I kind of think of it as to get there, logistics cost. You have to spend X number of war chest points to begin the mission. Okay, so you have to pay to get there, pay your dropship, pay your jump ships. And so each track has a war chest point cost. Okay, You can then select options. Now, options are really interesting. So the tracks have a set of options with war chest points above, and the options, there could be no options or they could be several. And you don't have to take the options, well, they're optional. Obviously, it says options. And if they're a benefit to you, then your opponent usually gets positive points to their final objective, to their final objective points. So I'll explain what objective points here, and then we can put these two things together. Objective points are the kind of victory points, the points you get for winning different objectives. So these are objective-based scenarios. Now, the objectives could be anything. It could be I'm going to destroy you, I'm going to do something else, I'm going to control a particular area. But whoever gets the most objective points effective by the end of the scenario wins. If you've taken options and the option is positive for you, then your opponent will get extra points. Okay, as long as he at least gets one objective. So he has to at least have one objective. They have to have one objective completed, and then they get the bonus points from the options. And it might be easier to explain once I go for a particular one example of one of the tracks. Special rules, so there could be any special environmental conditions or different things. And the next track is this idea of to choose your own adventure. And the next track could, in different war chests, in different chaos campaign scenarios, indicate that if you're victorious, you go one direction. If you're not victorious, you go in another direction. Okay, it can be a case of mapping out the series of tracks into a storyline. Or they could be quite linear, where you literally just go from one track to the next track. So, let's skip through this bit about entering play area. Entering play area, same as normal game. People just basically walk into the map. Retreating is an interesting one. Usually you can just walk off, and it's really important that you get the idea of retreating in a campaign because, well, things can get busted up. And if they get busted up, you're going to need to repair them, but you can't repair them if they're completely destroyed. So you can, if you retreat off the side of your deployment edge, then you're considered not to be part of the battle. You can also then have your entire force retreat, and you can say, okay, right, we're calling it under the Mercenary Code of Conduct. We're withdrawing as a force, and we're not going to contest the objective anymore. And that's a good way of ending the game. So by mutual agreement, you can just say that they're leaving. But anything that's on the battlefield could be claimed as salvage, okay, by the opponent if you go down that route. But if you could, again, there's another optional rule here. It says no, again, that ends in mutual agreement does not entitle either side to claim as salvage. So you could say, that if both sides decide to withdraw, nobody gets anything. And you might have to play out the whole scenario to decide who controls the battlefield at the end. There's an abstract amount of time between tracks. Part of the wonders of Chaos Campaign is it doesn't really matter. Okay, you can literally say there's 1 week between tracks, or you can say that's longer. It's not a time-bound system, so they don't really keep track of saying it's 1 day per this or 1 day per that. It's not that granular. But in general, nothing less than a week, because usually a week is the amount of time it would take to turn around things. Now, this is where some people get a little bit confused, and we'll come back to this in a minute, about support points. And support points are the actual ones that you spend on repairs. And they depend on the amount of support points you get depends on the amount of your force size. Now, in the case of a force size of 12 mechs, the number of support points you get is equal to the number of war chest points you get. Okay, so it says that to convert war chest points into support points, multiply the number of war chest points to be converted by the player's base force size multiplier. And this is a long-winded way, but basically it says here it's calculated by determining how many base units can be made out of the starting force. So the module breaks up into 4 lances, fractions of rounding up. Okay, breaks force up into lances of 4 mechs. So if you've got three lances of 4 mechs, then your base force size multiplier is going to be ×3. And that means anytime you want to convert war chest points into support points, you get 3 times as many support points. So that's a nice, simple. You have to make sure it's, because it's a very abstract method, you have to make sure you say that it's going to be exactly, you can't have like one mech per lance. That doesn't make any more sense, unless of course some of the mechs have been destroyed. So it's a pretty easy thing to say that throughout the whole campaign there's going to be a base force size multiplier of ×3. If you're playing with a company, battalion size game, you can turn that base force size multiplier to ×9, and that could make some quite interesting games. And we'll go through that in a minute. We'll come on to repairs after we've looked at tracks, and again, truly destroyed is really important. So understanding that things that are truly destroyed cannot be repaired. There's only one circumstance where something's truly destroyed in Battletech, and that's if the central torso is completely eliminated. If your engine is destroyed, you're not actually truly destroyed. If the head's destroyed, you're not truly destroyed. It is really all about the central torso internal structure. Protect the metal, not the meat. In other words, you can replace the pilots, but not the mech. They're expensive. I'll come back to war chest debt in a minute. Let's have a look at the tracks. Okay, so you've got some more interesting rules here about planetary conditions, and also a good one. This is again a repeat from what's inside Total Warfare and Battle Mech Manual of what is meant by crippling damage. It's really important that you don't push things in a campaign, and the way to simulate that is mechs that once they suffer crippled damage, they have to retreat. It's called forced withdrawal, which is down here, and that means that you won't basically fight to either side. It's completely annihilated, which can be fun, but not cost effective when you're trying to run a mercenary company. So it's really important that you're kind of sticking to the crippling damage forced withdrawal rules to make sure. So a mech making forced withdrawal must always move towards its home edge. And there's some debate about what exactly that means, but in a very basic sense, every turn you must move at least 1 hex closer to your edge. There's also a nice optional rule in the Battle Mech Manual, which is called Broken Morale, which says when you are in forced withdrawal, all your attacks are at +3 to hit. And that makes forced withdrawal a bit more serious, because sometimes forced withdrawal you can be retreating, but you're still fighting, and it doesn't really make much difference. Salvage we'll come to in a minute, and there's some extra rules here about dropping mechs, which are particular to scenarios, which again lifted out the Battle Mech Manual, and some battlefield support point rules. This is the main thing. This is what we call the kind of that campaign track. Now, when you're designing these as a GM, you can decide basically to just have a very linear track where you just go along following a series of steps, or you can have a more complicated track like this. So in this campaign flow chart, you've basically got the beginning, which is the meeting engagement track, and then you just follow through. If the attacker wins, you go for breakthrough, and then if the attacker wins, you go to the assault track, and then the attacker wins. So in this case, it'd just be 3 missions, but it could end up as going, meeting engagement track, attacker wins, breakthrough track, defender wins, counter attack, defender wins, but shoot the tracker wins, and you can go round and round in this until one of the forces has been either victorious or more usually is ground to the point where they are no longer an effective fighting force. So here are the objectives. Okay, not objectives, the tracks. Okay, got the situation, game setup. I'll go through this one particularly just as an example. In the initial confrontation between the two forces, rare side for either to have an immediate tactical advantage. Each side selects an equal number of map sheets to this to fight on, requiring an even number to be used, 2, 4, and so on. Little rule of thumb people use is the number of map sheets you have should be equal to the number of mechs playing on it divided by 2. So if you're playing 4 mechs a side, that's basically 8 mechs. So you divide that by 2 and you get 4, and that's 4 map sheets. It's not always true, but it gives you an idea. 2 map sheets is a bit limiting for a lance on lance, but you could do it with 2 map sheets. The defender selects their home edge first. The attacker home edge is the opposite. And your home edge is important, remember, because it's the edge you walk in on and it's the edge you retreat from. The attacker may field 33% of their total force. Now, this is an interesting statement, because what does percentage mean? And that depends on how you've done your force generation. If you've done your force generation by tonnage, then do percentage by tonnage. Okay, obviously, if your total tonnage is 675, then your tonnage is going to be 225, which is pretty normal, because usually in most tracks in a Chaos campaign, you have 1/3 of your force, which works well because in a company level game where you've got 12 mechs in your force, that's going to be 1 lance. So this is going to be a lance and lance. Game's going to take about 2 hours. In a battalion level, then you're going to be company on company forces, and that's going to be about a 6-hour game, or 5-6 hours. So it gives you an idea of how much time you've got to commit to your game and what you want to do. So if you're just playing the company level, then you're really going to be mostly playing a lance at a time. Attacker enters through their home edge in initiative order. Again, defender uses 33%, and same thing, enters through their edge. It costs 100 war chest points to deploy. Okay, so that's the cost it costs you to deploy to the mission. And then the options. Okay, now this, both players have to agree. Okay, if it's going against GM, so if it's player versus GM, then one player, only the player needs to agree. Okay, because the GM isn't keeping track of their force. If it's a player versus player, then both players have to basically say, oh, let's take the risk, and then both players will get the +100. You can't have one player saying, I'm going to fight at midnight, because the other player just won't turn up because they don't want to. Playing in a full moon night is actually quite difficult. There's a lot of rules involved in it. I wouldn't recommend it for new players, and also the modifiers mean it makes for quite a slow game. Mined out, attacker only recon teams have managed to place a number of light density conventional minefields. Now this is attacker only. So what does that mean? So say I'm the attacker, I select this, I get the benefit of having the minefields, but my opponent gets the +100 points to their final score if they get at least one objective. That's really important. They don't get the +100 unless they get objective points. So talking about that, let's go to the objectives. Objectives in this case, there's one here, make their acquaintance. The first team that destroys or cripples at least 50% of the units in the opposing force wins. Units which voluntarily withdraw from the map count towards the 50% objective, 200 points. Okay, there's only one objective in this mission. One of the things I'm not too keen on this, because I like to break that up. So if I was like to make a observation of a house rule, I would kind of break that down maybe into 100 points for 25%, and then 200 points for 50%. I don't like tracks that only have one objective. That makes them too dichotomous, and basically of one option or the other. Also, it means that this war chest thing, that your opponent, if he manages to put 50% of your units into force withdrawal, okay, or destroys them by either destroying them or totally destroying them, then they get the +100 option points. Okay, but if they don't get the +100 points. You got some special rules here, which is force withdrawal. Again, most of these things involve force withdrawal. I would most of the time play that, and then it's telling you that you can then go for a breakthrough or pursuit. Now, an interesting rule here: neither side may claim salvage at the conclusion of this track. Neither side may spend war chest points to repair, replace, or rearm following this track. That's a really interesting kind of one, because now you have to go straight to the next mission, okay, where you can select more units, but you can't pause. These kind of like lead-on tracks, as I call them, are quite punishing to do, because you could have taken quite a lot of damage in them. But you can select different forces. So for instance, if you go to the breakthrough track here, okay, the attacker may field up to 75% of their force listed units fielded during the prior attack are available for use, but may not be repaired. So you still get your rest of your force because you had 66% of your force you hadn't used. So in this case, the defender gets slightly less. They're not always completely equal. I will mention that if you've got a minus options, if you take that, then that's giving a benefit to you. Okay, so it basically is applied to your opponent's objective. So it says here, getting a grip, attacker only, and you select it, but your opponent gets minus 100 objective points because it's a minus 100. So the attacker may automatically win initiative a number of times equal to the number of full lancers. If that's actually right. It seems a bit strange. Because it seems a benefit, that one. I wonder if that's a misprint in there. Because the attacker may automatically win initiative is giving a benefit to the attacker. So that really should be a positive to the opponent. I have to check that one. So you run through these different scenarios, okay, and at the end of the scenario, you sometimes are allowed to repair. So how do you work out repairs? Well, this is where you need to use the tables up here. So this support point activity cost table tells you how much things cost to repair, and it's a very simple system. So at the end of the scenario, you then decide how much you need to repair, and you pay the support point cost. Remember, you're converting your war chest points to support points at a multiplier of ×3, because that's your your force base size multiplier, because you've got 3 lancers. So for instance, say you earned 200 objective points and you wanted to spend some points on repairs, you'd convert, say, 200 into 600 support points. You don't have to convert them till you've worked out how much money, how much points it's going to cost you to repair. Repair entire armor. Now that basically is just tonnage. So it's all done on tonnage, this system. So if you've got a 100-ton mech, it costs you 100 points to repair all of the armor. Only in locations which do not have internal structure damage. Okay. There is a one way in which you can play that in a more kind of structural way, a house rule way. Not house rule, sorry, it's in the rules. And you could say that people can repair all their armor in damaged locations, but, and this comes from the tech manual, that you can only have armor equal to twice your internal structure. So whatever your internal structure of your mech is on that location, you can only have double that as armor. So if you've got internal structure 15, the maximum armor you can have is 30. If it's a central torso location, that includes front and rear, or a left or right torso location. So if you've got, I don't know, a central torso of 30, then you can have 60 points of armor, and that means you could have 50 on the front, 10 on the rear. So that's a way of doing this tonnage. It's where you can actually repair armor, even though the internal structure isn't repaired. But if you want to keep it simple, just follow the rules here. So you can't put armor on if the area is damaged. Battletech's mech's internal structure is damaged. So this could be any, and this is kind of flaw of Chaos Campaign because it's quite simplified. If you take any damage in any internal structure, even 1 point, you have to pay tonnage ×2. So if you've got a 50-ton mech and you've lost all your armor and you've taken 5 points of internal damage to one location, then you've got to pay 50 × 2, 100 points just for the internal structure to be repaired, and then you've got to pay another 50 points to replace the armor. So in total that would be 150. It's kind of an abstract system because at the end of the day, if your Shadowhawk had like every single location was severely damaged and it was missing limbs, it would still cost the same amount. So that's that makes it kind of a bit of an abstraction, but it makes it nice and quick. Of course, mechs that have a central torso internal structure reduced to 0 cannot be repaired. That's what we call truly destroyed. So truly destroyed units you can't do anything with. Purchase a mech. So tonnage ×10. Again, you can only purchase standard standard, introductory technology mechs in this scenario, in this campaign. And so if you wanted to purchase a Shadowhawk, it's going to cost you 550 points. In actual fact, my previous example, the Shadowhawk's 55 tons, so it should be tonnage times 110 for repairing the internal structure, and 55 points for repairing the tonnage, just to correct that. Sure, I can't do simple maths. And then in this case, 550. Now, if you think about the scale of that, that's a really big investment. 550 points to buy a new mech, as opposed to, for the same mech, 110 plus 55, so 165 points for repairing a damaged mech, even seriously damaged, is quite serious. So a big difference. You don't want any of your mechs to get to the point where they're truly destroyed. In that regard, I've seen some Chaos campaigns go a bit sour because players don't play by what I would call the Mercenary Code of Conduct. The Mercenary Code of Conduct is an in-canon in-game thing, although it's not mentioned in here, where if someone calls uncle and says, "Don't shoot me anymore, I'm retreating," or my mech is disabled, you don't keep shooting them. You allow the people to retreat. That can be signified by, for instance, a mech warrior ejecting. So say, for instance, you say, my mech warrior is seriously damaged, he's not going to be able to do a fighting withdrawal, I'm just going to eject now. And then if you control the battlefield, you could come and collect the parts of those mech and repair them later. That's kind of considered the mercenary honor thing to do. What's not mercenary honorable, although there are some dishonorable mercenaries, is to keep shooting at the mech, just for the sake of shooting at it once the person's ejected, because you're just basically costing a lot of money, or in that case, shooting the pilot once they've ejected. That thing tends to get you a bad reputation. So if you're playing good mercenaries who are following the Mercenary Code of Conduct, don't shoot your opponent's pilots when they eject, and don't shoot your opponent's mechs when they've surrendered. Because one, it leads you to have a bad reputation, and two, on a more serious note, it leads to some bruised feelings between players if they lose their mechs because someone is out for blood. Selling mechs only really comes up in two situations. One, you are running so low on funds that you need to sell some mechs to make some money to repair the other mechs. And two, you've got yourself a shiny new mech because you have salvaged someone by, for instance, blowing their head off in one shot, which happens in Battletech. Rearming, really, really simple. Any expenditure of ammunition and you pay 5 points, and it's all been replaced. It's an abstract system. It's nice and simple. Hire a new mech warrior, 300. Mech warriors are 5/4. Nice and simple. Or you could say, in this case, you can make them a piloting skill 4, gunnery skill 3. If you want to use the kind of rules they suggest here of experienced pilots. Heal a mech warrior. This is kind of signifying the amount of time it takes. 100 wounds per box as a kind of more realistic way of doing it. You might insist that people can only heal 1 wound between each track. So if there's 1 week, you can't basically heal 5 wounds in one go. But technically, by the rules, you could. But it's quite expensive to pay for a mech warrior to be healed. It's also, weirdly, it's optional in this. So you kind of you can choose whether or not you're putting your mech warrior in hospital, or maybe he just doesn't want to go to hospital and he doesn't pay the points. It seems a bit strange, but again, abstract system. Last of all, skill advancements. Now this is where the game can get a bit bizarre, especially as they go on. So the advancement costs are very simple. Gunnery skill -1, 200 points. Mech warrior pilot skill -1, 150 points. Okay, and special piloting ability, again, points cost times 100. Again, that is only really used if you've got the full campaign operation rules. Don't think the special piloting ability or SPA rules are in here, although they are on the cards. But it's a good one to leave out if you don't want to make it too complicated. The reason I say it can go a bit south is you have to kind of limit this. If you don't limit it, then people can skill up very quickly. And one of the kind of rules of thumb I tend to say is, one, you can only increase one skill point per game between each track, and two, that I think that's the most important one. I can't remember what the second one was now, but you can only go for one for track. I think the other one was saying that you could only skill up if you got a kill, which was another way of balancing this, because you can get people to decrease their skill very, very quickly. It'd be like the equivalent of saying in 4 missions someone has gone from a regular troop at 5-4 to an elite troop at 2-3. Of course, it's going to cost you a lot of points to do it. So that's the other thing. It's going to cost a lot of support points to do it, but it could lead to very rapid skill escalation. So that's the increase in the skills. So once you've paid for all your support points and paid for your skill advancements, you can then move on to the next track. Now, what happens if you've got through the campaign and you've got a load of mechs that are basically beaten up and you need to do repairs and you haven't got enough points to progress? Well, you get to war chest debt. You've got basically 3 options here. You can sell. So you sell your mech that you couldn't use. You say, right, I'm going to sell that mech and I'll get the points back. And effectively you have either butchered that mech for parts or you have literally sold it. The other way is you can literally say, when you get to 0 war chest points, you retire. The third way, isn't skip a track I said here, is it's basically saying that you go into war chest debt. War chest debt means that you can't do any repairs, but your war chest points to enter missions goes into negatives. So you can't basically repair mechs because you haven't got any cash, but you can borrow points. So if you're on 0 war chest points and a track costs 100 points, you can spend 100 points and go into the next track. So at least you've still got skin in the game. You can still basically get onto the next track. So one other thing to say about purchasing mechs is in some games you might decide that there isn't an opportunity to purchase mechs. So for instance, if you're doing like a game where there isn't the opportunity to get reinforcements, you could make a little rule to say, right, no one can purchase new mechs. You've got what you've got and there's no opportunity to get any more. But that can lead to forces degrading really quickly. So if you go on and look at the Battle of Two Kid Chaos campaign, which is a slightly more complicated than this one, you might say that you can't purchase new mechs between missions, or you could say that those purchased mechs come from a reserve company. So you're figuratively paying for them, but they're actually there in reserve. So there are different ways to explain it. Again, it's an abstract system, so, and I've said the word abstract lots of times in this scenario because that's something you have to accept. With an abstract system, you are taking some bizarre or not always fully common sense methods. If you want, to really get granular, you have to go up to something like the full chaos campaign, the full campaign operations rules rather than chaos campaign. But that's why we play chaos campaign, because it's simple. You can calculate the amount of damage, amount of support points you need to repair your mechs very quickly, and it doesn't take more than 15 minutes at the end of the game to do that, and then you can get back to playing the next mission. So that's the overall tone of chaos campaign. If you don't really want to do lots and lots of admin, if you don't want to do lots and lots of organization, it's very easy to set up a chaos campaign, and it's very easy to make tracks as well. So all of these tracks here, this is just suggestions, but you can find in other products tracks that have got this same format that you can use. And again, you can scale this up to battalion, you can scale it to company, depending on which way you want to be. And there's no reason you can't use this in Alpha Strike. The rules, actually, just going through that, the rules work exactly the same. You would literally say in Alpha Strike, if you've got any points of armor removed, you pay this. If you've got any points of internal, you pay this. If you have got a mech that has the ammo trait, you have to spend 5, and so on. And then you just have the gunnery skill, you wouldn't have the piloting skill. So you can use Chaos Campaign in an Alpha Strike game, and Alpha Strike gives you the opportunity to play much larger games. Now, I don't think there's anything else I missed. There's a nice thing here for doing random maps if you want to do random maps, which is using the Battletech beginner's box and Grasslands map pack there. Just thinking if there's anything else I need to say. Nope, I think that's it. So there you go. New hired mech warriors are regular quality, gunnery 4, piloting skill 5. I think that is everything. Now, this is again the simplified version of Chaos Campaign. You can get more complicated than this, and it does when you start dealing with buying mechs that are different technology levels. So if you basically have got a clan invasion Chaos Campaign and you want to buy a mech that's got any standard technology, then it's going to be more expensive than buying a mech that's introduction technology. And you kind of get a discount for buying intro tech mechs. So if you want an intro tech Atlas, it costs you half the amount it would to get a standard mech. And in the same way, it would cost you less for introductory ammo than standard ammo. So it costs you less just for a basic LRM than an Artemis 4 LRM. So that's a really useful system again for just doing this without making it very, very complicated. Again, you can make up any of these scenarios yourself. And if you want to have a look at my blog at comstar.home.blog, there is a section, if you go to the menu, called Tracks, which allows you to actually just look at a load of ideas for different missions that you could take. So that's a particularly good source for them. We've been playing Chaos Campaigns for quite a while, and there are some kind of ideas here for different Chaos Campaigns here about different objectives listed at the end. So really the key thing about Chaos Campaign is keep it simple, keep the whole things quick, decide on a particularly limited area, don't make it too grand in scope, usually the action on one planet. You can play in a narrative way, or not a narrative way. You don't have to play narrative at all. You can replay a particular war battle in the Succession Wars. You can just make up your own and just say, right, there's a planet here called Lions, and the Draconis Combine are going to try and invade it. And again, just the way you design your forces is whatever you feel balanced with, whatever you feel happy with in doing it. From 1, just working through tonnage. Method 2, working on BV3, being completely random, or 4, even turning this into some sort of long-term role-playing game where you create a company using a time of war and your GM takes you through a particular scenario. Again, it makes it nice and simple. So that's Chaos Campaign. I hope that helps. If there's any questions, you can leave them in the comments or look me up on Facebook, on my blog at StratoCast Level 3, and on my homepage of comstar.home.blog. Hope this helps, and next time I might look at maybe a review of a more complicated Chaos Campaign like the Battle of Tukid or some other examples. But remember, this is a free document. You can go and download it for free from Drive-Thru RPG, from Catalyst Game Labs store. It doesn't cost anything, and it's a very useful simple thing, but it only works with the rules you've got here for introductory technology. If you want to go beyond that, then there is a small, again, free book called just Chaos Campaign, or to move up to completely to getting campaign operations. And if you can't find a copy in your store, you can always just buy the PDF from the Catalyst Game Labs store, or from Drive-Thru RPG as a PDF, and it makes it kind of handy to have as a reference if you've got a tablet to do that. Great. Until next time, I'll see you then.